welcome. So Dr.
Thank you.
Maria is coming to us all the way from Brazil. I've interacted with her a lot at the club. She's an occupational therapist, researcher, and specialist in assistive technology, an area where I have a lot of interest. And she will be introducing our speaker today, all the way from Belgium. And their topic is about inclusive assessment for equity, from early medical intervention to formal education, something that we really need to know about. We really need to understand and see how this helps in bridging that gap of inclusive education. Over to you, Dr. Marie.
Thank you. So I am Dr. Maria de Mello. I am Project Director of the Rotary Club of World Disability Advocacy. And I would like to tell to everybody that at our club, we dream of a world where everyone, regardless of ability, is valued, empowered, and included. Our vision is simple: a society where people with disabilities are not just accommodated, but respected, seen, heard, and given the power to shape their own destinies. We believe in justice, opportunity, and dignity for all, everywhere. And so thank you for everyone to share this dream with us. And now I would like to introduce and to welcome Dr. Bruhi. She is a clinical psychologist with extensive expertise and highly specialized training. Dr. Bruhi earned a bachelor's degree from the Open University at UK before continuing her studies at the University of Lyon in France, where she completed the French equivalent of a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's in cognitive psychology, and a master's in clinical psychology and psychopathology. She went on to obtain a doctorate degree in cognitive psychology, specializing with expertise in language comprehension. Dr. Bruhi collaborates with international schools in the Benelux, Brussels, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, delivering workshops, seminars, and teachers training in implementation the SBI method that she created. So her expertise is focused on providing accurate assessments, effective interventions, and compassionate care for neurodiverse people. Her presentation will last around 30 minutes, and then we will have 5 minutes for questions. So the stage is yours, Dr. Bruhi. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here and to be part of this wonderful summit promoting inclusive education. I think Dr. Maria has given me a very, good presentation of who I am. So I think I would just go straight and talk about why we are here. I would like to share my screen if it's okay. I would, because I have a presentation. So I would just do that. I hope it works.
Yes, it's working.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Okay. So I'm going to talk about inclusive assessments. Now, this presentation will look at neurodevelopmental disabilities and in terms of the early identification of these disabilities and how it impacts learning. Now, I would like to, sometimes when we are doing diagnostics or when people say go and get a diagnosis or whatever, we tend to use a term which is called testing. And testing has a connotation which is a little bit, seen in a negative light. So because when you are tested, there's a possibility that you will fail, right? But early diagnosis is a way of not empowering the families, but also the person who is going to be evaluated so that we understand what is happening. Now, I would focus this talk on neurodevelopmental, that is disabilities, that are often not obvious to us. Because oftentimes when we talk about disabilities, we are looking at maybe physical disabilities, but neurodevelopmental, emotional, social, and psychological or mental disabilities also play a role. And oftentimes when these disabilities are noticed, it is a little bit too late. I'm going trying to, okay. Let's look at some of the barriers in this. Now, when we talk about physical disabilities, as I said, like visual, auditory, motor, etc., these are often recognized very early because it's obvious, right? You cannot deny it. If a child is struggling to walk, or if there is a problem with their speech, or there is a problem with maybe they use their motor skills or auditory or visual, these are seen quite early, and medical services or intervention or any support, whether it is in the community, whether it's in the family, are often quite earlier on observed. And therefore, if there is any support, it is given almost immediately. We try to see the tangible evidence of these disabilities. Obviously, there is also a lot of sympathy around, right? Because a disability needs a community to help, whether it's medical, whether it's family, whether it's social. And then in countries or in areas where there are health systems and insurances that support, in terms of claims, in terms of payments, it is also very clear. So for example, if the child has visual impairment, there are clear ways of you go to maybe an optical clinic, or you go and see, an optician, and then something is identified almost immediately. If the person needs glasses, or if the person needs some kind of medical intervention, it is very clear and something is done. Now, when it comes to what I would call non-physical disabilities, the one that is not tangible, the one that you would not see because until the child is actually at a certain age, intellectual, global intellectual delay, or slow intellectual delay. The neurodevelopmental ones, like the learning ones, the ones we know, the dyslexia, the dysgraphia, all the dys, and the neurocognitive ones, whether it's autism, whether it's ADHD, whether it's executive functioning, and the behavior ones. Sometimes we don't talk about behavior disability, but that also exists. Behavior adjustment issues, oppositional, defiance issues, and most importantly, also mental health. We like to call them disorders, but I also see them as disabilities because they are barriers. So if a child at 15 becomes a schizophrenic, that is a disability because they can't work, they can't go to school, they can't. So these are what we call mental or emotional issues that can, block learning or can change the learning path of a person. And because these are all not, seen before the child is a certain age, we realize, or in my clinical work, I realize that the children are referred, or we see them much, much later in comparison to other disabilities. Of course, I'm generalizing, but certainly this is what we see more often. But in taking clinical history, when a family comes, or we see a child that probably has ADHD or will eventually have dyslexia, almost all clinical history, there is always a point where the parents do sense that something is wrong. It's just a feeling they sort of felt, and they will tell you, all right, at a certain age, I could sort of see that something was different. But oftentimes they have narratives that they use to explain away. People be like, oh, I thought they would grow out of it. Oh, I thought that, my friend or my parent or my pediatrician or my whoever said that, oh, I was imagining things, or I'm too stressed as a mother, or I'm not, too disciplined enough. So we tend to explain these things away. And what happens is that it delays early intervention. There's always the social stigma, because imagine that you would go, your child is 2 or 3, and you say, I don't think you're very much interested in letters. I don't think they like to sing the rhymes. When they are in the preschool and, children go through a stage where they're singing rhymes all the time. And we know that rhyming is a precursor for reading later, So, and we know that some children with dyslexia, for example, right, when you take the clinical history, you see that these are children who were not even sensitive to the rhyming. And that is a very important information. Or that the child was, maybe not looking or not, integrating enough. So there are always earlier signs. But parents and families will sort of, either blame, or they will see it or feel it, but they will just take it in silently and hope that it is going to go away. But a lot of clinical history from parents indicate that before 12 months, they could tell that something was going to, and this would be maybe through a diagnosis of maybe attention deficit disorder or learning disability or some kind of behavior disability. There are always little things that parents will say that, no, I did notice this, or I did feel that, or I did think that, but then they just thought, well, it is not an alarming sign. And then I would also talk about a short, point about how insurance companies, or where there is help, that it is very difficult at an early age to say that, okay, I think something is wrong. Let me go and try and get a diagnosis, and then let me get help from my support system. I use the word insurance, but it could be some kind of, social center. It could be some kind of, and there aren't clear trajectory for a parent to say that, oh, I think my child is not rhyming, they are 3, maybe we should look into it. And so all these are clear barriers that make parents not seek further, not ask for help, and they lead to late detection and therefore late intervention, and this go a long way to impair their education, and therefore it puts them at a what do you call it, a disadvantage, in that sense. And then there's last thing of the most parents being sensitive, even when they see that something is wrong or something is not right, they're scared that their child will be treated differently, because it is not easy to tell what's going on. Maybe the child has behavior, and they just feel that, well, I don't want them to have a label. I don't want them to be treated differently. But one thing that parents must know is that a child who is different knows that they're different. They know. So it is not that the labeling or the identification is always coming from the external. There's also that internal awareness. The child knows that I am not the same as my friend. I am not, interested or reading or writing or maybe drawing or whatever it is. The child sees a difference, because children are clever. Even when you see them in preschool, 2, 3, 4, they look and they see. So the child always knows that, look, something is wrong. And this is what I call the imposter syndrome. The child knows that something is wrong, but everybody wants them to be the same. And so they just feel that they are just pretending that they know, but they don't. They are pretending that they can read, but they can't read. They are pretending they have, they're socially adapted, but they know that they're not, And so the awareness is there right in your child, and therefore it is important through a process of diagnosis to name it. Now, we will look at the benefits of early diagnosis. Now, we talk about a lot of diagnosis, and the word diagnosis, as I said, because it is linked to, we're going to do some testing with it, it really, gives a negative connotation. And this is what I want to change. All we're doing is trying to put a name. We're trying to put a name on something that the child feels, and oftentimes the parent feel, but cannot describe it. Cannot describe it because it is not physical. If you see a child who has ADHD and they're sitting down calmly, they're fantastic. They're fantastic. They have all the physical abilities, and yet you put them in certain conditions and you realize that something is wrong. If you see a child with learning disability, physically, there's nothing wrong with them, until you put them in front of a reading, and then you see a certain issue. So all we're trying to do is put a name on something that it is not clear to see, and therefore it is not clear to explain. Because children like to explain things because their friends ask them, why can't you do this? Why can't you do the math? And a child must be capable of saying, it's because I have dyscalculia, so I don't do the math. You do the math, but maybe I can read. So even in group situation, the child has a name to say, look, I cannot do this, but I can do this, and this is the reason why. And then also obviously it leads to early intervention, and early intervention and early diagnosis is so important, and how much further it goes to impact on our lives. And I'm going to explain this. You have one child who has some kind of neurodevelopmental disorder. It is not obvious, so you're not seeing, but the situations in which we put the child shows that the child struggles or the person struggles. But when you see them from the outside, everything looks great. This child has a family. The family has parents, maybe siblings, maybe extended family. They may be in school, or they may be in some kind of center, or they may be in some kind of social. There are teachers, there are teaching staff, they may be in a social group, maybe some kind of extracurricular activities. It could be church activities, it could be whatever. And the fact is that the people around, maybe the parents, also are connected with other social groups. So maybe they may be working, so the one person with the neurodevelopmental disability or disorder is surrounded by a whole community of people, all right? Now, if this person is not diagnosed and they're struggling, what happens? Every single entourage also struggles indirectly. So the teacher is having a difficulty, the parents or the family is having difficulty, the social settings is having difficulty. Eventually, the profession or the work of the family or the parents are also struggling because parents worry about their children. If you imagine that your child has behavior issues or cannot read, and every single time you're being called, oh, look at your child couldn't do this, they couldn't do that, we don't know what to do, we don't know, we've tried everything, we don't understand. You cannot have the peace of mind as a parent to do your work, all right? So at some point in time, we see that the adults around this one undiagnosed person ends up seeking some kind of medical because they're tired. They have burnout, they have anxiety, they have worries, and therefore they end up making more claims on insurance or on our health system or on our social surroundings because of the one back situation where a child is not given the support that they need. And the same thing goes to a teacher who has maybe one or two children with disabilities that have not been clearly labeled, that have not been intervened. The teacher teaches one day and the next day they take off because they can't. They're tired. They try. So you have absenteeism, you have issues with staff. So the schools, system are also drained because there aren't real, proper, inclusive systems for a child because nobody knows what's wrong with the child. They say, we don't know, they're just difficult. Oh, we don't know because they're not reading, etc., etc. So these are some of the reasons why we need to do something about it. And we must advocate not only for the intervention, but it must be very early. It must be very early as possible. And I'm going to talk about ways that we can make it as early as possible, because I don't need to repeat it. I think the whole day it's been very clear that early intervention, early diagnostics is very important in terms of not only equity, but in terms of support. I would like to speak with parents here as very early actors. Let's be honest. You are the first person in relation with your child. Feel confident to signal anything that you think is not matching your instinct as a parent. Repeat it as much as possible. Believe you me, at one point, someone will say, okay, let's really look at what's going on. Where you find yourself, communities where there aren't clear centers for diagnosis, there aren't clear or experts or professionals or whatever. Even go back to where you had your child, even if it's a local, traditional center. Explain, say that, look, I feel something is going on. I don't understand, help me understand it. But most important, also reinforce the skills of your child, the strength every child, one way or another, may present some issues, but they may also present some skills. So where you are seeking help or you are waiting for someone to hear you, strengthen the strengths of your child. So for example, if the child is not, but they can draw, strengthen the drawing. If it's, sports that they're good at, strengthen the sports. If it's until you get to a point where you get somebody to hear you and to listen to you. Here are some early signs that you can watch for as parents. And here I'm talking about even before 12 months. So real early infancy, before 24 months, when you feel that your child is not connecting emotionally with their surroundings, when there isn't a clear recognition, when you are separated from your child, you feel that the stress or the anxiety that the child lives goes on and on and on to the point where you think, okay, this is really shouldn't be happening, or at least not at this frequency. When there are some kind of unusual, feeding or some kind of sleep patterns that you are not comfortable with, and then you feel, no, this is not settling my child, or where there is that lack of curiosity in your child. These are all early signs that parents must feel confident to address and to pay attention to. Where you have unadapted social interest or playing skills, where the child wants to play but does not know how to play. And even as I was mentioning earlier about the rhyming, there are some children as early as 18 months, they don't have the same interest in letters, in numbers, in shapes that we see other children, interact. And sometimes if your child goes to some kind of a daycare, the professionals there will tell you where you see the child focusing too much on one thing or not enough on another thing, or early signs of worries, when your child gets too worried about little things, little fears. All these together, of course, if you take them individually, they may not seem much, but when you put them all together, a picture starts to come up. And this is where I talk about a logbook. It is very important that parents keep some kind of a logbook, an observational book, whatever it is, about these early signs of issues, things that you sense, but it is not easy to explain. At least make a note of it in all areas of development. I would like to say something very important, that we need to shift away from developmental milestones as we know it. Developmental, we're talking about walking. When was the first walk? When was the first the talking? When is the first smile? We are always talking about the physical things that we see. It is very rare to see developmental milestones books that looks at the social, that looks at the behavior, that looks at the emotions, that looks at the anxiety, that looks at the mental health, that looks at, and we often don't investigate enough even as professionals to get a clear understanding of what goes on behind the scenes, the emotions, the mental health, the psychological health of the child, until it becomes so obvious when oftentimes we put them in social settings. Then we begin to see that, okay, something is not going right. And for this, I would like to urge all actors to yes, Dr. Maria,
You have just more 10 minutes, okay?
Thank you. So yeah, to all professionals, not to just focus on the physical developmental milestones, the growth charts, the size of the head, the size of his height, how tall they are growing, how much. These are great, and I think it is important, but we look at that. But let's look at the neurodevelopmental milestones. Let's look at social skills. Let's look at emotional development. Let's look at worry. How is the child managing when you take them, you drop them somewhere, and you come back and pick them? How are they taking care? How are they managing that separation? How are they showing kindness? How are they sharing their toys? How are they not sharing their toys? How are they sharing their food? Well, how are they not sharing their food? All these things start from below 12 months. And these are little precursors that eventually build up a history that will enable early intervention, and because it's going to lead to early diagnosis. There are lots of basic screening tools now. There are lots of them which are digital that professionals can use to screen not only physical growth, but also what I call neuro, socio, emotional, and mental growth patterns. And we have different centers. So for example, when you have a child, you go to prenatal, and then after you have postnatal. And I would like to urge people in postnatals to also pay attention to these sorts of things. Now, reimbursements become the next thing. If we have actors as stakeholders here who are, in reimbursement, in financial support, it is absolutely important that non-physical disabilities are supported in terms of early diagnostics. In most areas, you have designated centers that when you go to, maybe the child would eventually be attended to when you think, oh, my child is not really reading well, my child is not really, feeling or relating well, there are social issues. And in these sort of recognized centers, sometimes there is a pathway to be supported in terms of, financial support for diagnosis, for early intervention, and also for diverse education or inclusive education. But I'll be very honest with you, and this is not just about, developed world or non-developed world, generally, because I work with international families, and we see that when it comes to non-physical disabilities, it is very complicated to get intervention in terms of insurance. In my own clinical work, when parents bring a form for me to where there is insurance, so we're not talking about when, but even where there's insurance, the forms they bring is all about physical disability. And I find that very sad, because it is good that there is already something, but what about the reading disability or the learning disability, the emotional disability? There is nothing there. And so if you really, for example, oftentimes I decide and I ask the family, go and ask your insurance provider, the forms they're giving is not the right form, and then they often come back telling me, actually, they said there isn't any other form. So just try and fit whatever you think is the disability on this form. And it is so difficult. And so oftentimes one needs to write a letter, a descriptive letter, explaining why the reading is a disability and therefore they need support, or why the social skills is a kind of disability, or why the anxiety is a form of disability, or even why the ADHD is impacting on that. And most professionals don't know, they don't. And so a lot of support in terms of financial are gone. So in terms of recognition, I would also talk about, I think I mentioned earlier, professionals, midwives, pediatricians, pediatric nurses, early. Please pay attention to the emotional, the neurodevelopmental, and all these things that are not so obvious when the child is still very young. The logbook I mentioned is very important. Any signal from parents, these are clear solutions. And I would like to say that there are very cultural beliefs also, depending on where we find ourselves, where we explain things away. You said, oh, the child is a bit jittery and can't sit still. Oh, he's like his grandfather. He's going to grow out of it. Oh, no, that is a bit like, it's like the cousin, And so we explain it away, and these beliefs stops proper diagnostic and early intervention. And I would also like to urge, that there has to be easier pathways for insurances or any kind of benefit system to support neurodevelopmental or non-physical disabilities. And this includes training their staff, so that if families consult them and say, my child has, let's say, dyslexia, what do I do? That they can guide them to process, because oftentimes what they say is, we don't know, there's nothing in our system that it can go take this category, and therefore we cannot help you. And I think that this is something that needs to change, because financial support goes a long way to bridge the gap for inclusiveness because it helps with early detection. So there has to be a kind of partnership, because there is a significant economic, health, and mental well-being impact, not only on the person who is not diagnosed early or even when they are diagnosed later. We often see comorbidities because they've been diagnosed too late. For example, a child who is diagnosed later as ADHD, oftentimes they are comorbidity in terms of anxiety, very low self-esteem, very low self-confidence, sometimes early depressive symptoms. Why? Because they've grown in society or in environments where nobody could identify that and nobody could support them. And this is why it goes a long way to impact. And if the child is impacted upon, a bit like I said earlier, the whole system is impacted upon, or because a child does not live in isolation, they are surrounded by a small community, a small village. And please make no mistake, every person surrounding that child has a risk of some kind of emotional or even physical health because of the energy it takes and the worry it takes to help or support the child. And still one says, well, we still don't know what's going on. We still don't understand what's going on. And so a diagnosed child goes a long way to also help the support system that goes with the child. And this is where I would like to end my talk, and I'll be happy with some questions from whoever. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share this aspect of my expertise.
This was wonderful to be here with you, Dr. Kwan, because my son, now he's 26, and I observed something different on him when he was 3 months old. And at this point, this my observation, because I am an occupational therapist, made the whole difference in his life. I agree with each word that you said here today. As a mother and as an occupational therapist is working part in this field. Okay, we have a question here. Can I tell you?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, the first question is, should parents get their children diagnosed even if they display the similar traits in their childhood and yet they become successful adults professionals?
Yes, this is a very interesting question because oftentimes when parents see that their children have some kind of difference, it reminds them of their own childhood because we are like our children in a way, right? And so they think, oh, I was the same when I was in school. I was the same when I was a child. And look at me, maybe now I'm a successful teacher or nurse or banker or whatever. So it's going to be okay. Well, I think that it is unfortunate because if you compare the same thing to before antibiotics was invented, right? A long time ago, you got an infection, there was no antibiotics, and whatever system was there helped you. And if you survived, yes, you lived. But today we have antibiotics. So if your child has an infection, oh, I had the same infection, but 100 years ago, 30 years ago, I wasn't given antibiotics and I survived. Look at me. So no, you're not going to say that. You're going to say, with today's advancement, with today's knowledge and expertise, let me make the life of my life of my child easier. And if there is something to be done, I want it to be done. So it is important that that is done. Yeah.
Yes, and not only to make the child life easier, as you said, to all people around them. Yeah, the whole society. Okay, thank you. And we have another question. Most children who get tested come out with diagnosis. Are the children being overdiagnosed these days? This is a whole discussion. In Brazil, we are at the right time discussing it now here.
The truth is, yes, we are diagnosing a lot. That's true. And thank God for that. I am so grateful that we are diagnosing. Can you call it over-diagnosing? Probably. But when you use the word over, you're comparing it to what? We are diagnosing a lot because now knowledge has advanced. There's a lot of, doctors and researchers like yourself, Dr. Maria. putting a lot of effort and energy into research to try to make us understand, to try to make us see what are the strengths, what are the signs that we should look for. And therefore, today we see that something is going on much, much earlier. We have very sensitive, diagnostic tools that enable us to be able to identify certain disabilities as early as possible. And therefore, yes, we are diagnosing. The question is, are people becoming more and more? And I would say no. I don't think people are becoming more and more dyslexic, let's say, or more and more, ADHD. I think that we are identifying them more and more because we have expertise. Yes.
I agree. We have more tools, more expertise to doing that
Exactly.
before we didn't have. Okay.
Precisely.
And the last question that we have here, if parents don't get access to the diagnostic assessment for their children, in which ways could they advocate for the inclusive education and support in schools?
Yes, this is a very interesting, and it happens all the time where children, there's no access for diagnosis, and even if there is, the waiting lists are so long. And I always say that a child or any person, whatever label or word disability, also has some kind of strengths. And it is always important to present both. In any school and in most areas, even when there aren't clear pathways of inclusive education for, differential learning or different learning profiles, most teachers or most schools are open to see what else could be done, and they're willing to work with parents. And as a parent, you know your child more than anybody in any school. It is important to recognize that, yes, there are some issues, but look, my child can also do this. Oh, they can also do that. Oh, they can also do that. So it is very important to present the things that they can do, the strengths that they have, the difference, the other creativities that they have, to all at the same time acknowledging that, yes, there are some issues going on, and accepting, because this is the way of partnering with a teacher. I always say that a teacher spends, for every year that the child grows, a teacher spends only a speck moment in the child's life. The parent is the main point of continuity in the whole child's life. So teacher A next year may be teacher B, next year may be teacher C, but the parent is the one always following the child. And so it is important that, and this is why I put some of the idea of the logbook, the observational books, all this. And oftentimes teachers are ready to understand, oh, I can see from 3 months already, like Dr. Maria, like your child, oh, from 3 months already, probably they couldn't even hold it. Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Oh, these are all, oh, okay. Now I understand. Okay, maybe they were born like that. Let's see what we can do. There is a story.
Yes.
That is the point. Teachers or supporters, whoever, always want to hear a certain story so that it makes sense, because that's what diagnosis is making the story make sense.
Yes, yeah.
You see, so when you go with your and say, look, at 3 months, he was already not doing this. Even at 6 months, the rhymes, it just didn't make sense to them. Even at 12 months, when children were singing, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, my child was looking somewhere else and could not figure out that the star and the R are rhyming. And so maybe they go together, and any will say, okay, I see, I understand, I'm going to find. It is when the story makes sense and the historical development of the child makes sense that people are willing to do something.
Yes. Thank you so much for your speech. It was wonderful. And I believe was enlightened a lot of things for everyone that could watch us today. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Dr. Bruhi.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, and have a good afternoon, wherever you are, or
Oh,
evening
yes.
or morning.
Yes. Thank you all for being here with us
Thank you
today.
all.
Thank you so much. I can feel your passion, Dr. Kwan. You've reminded me that how did you put it? We are all part of that entourage where we are responsible for the children. We need to understand them. We need to support them, and just figure out how to get this going. And thank you for telling us that just because we did not have the privilege to go through assessment back in the days doesn't mean our children need to go through the same. As you were talking and I was just listening, one thing that came to mind was, why is assessment very expensive across the world? Like, in Kenya, we are amongst the most advanced countries when it comes to issues with persons with disabilities currently in Africa. However, even for a child to just get assessment from a public institution, they have to book, some of them months in advance. I'm a Rotarian, so sometimes we run once a year, we run a program for just kids with disabilities. We have fun with them, etc. Within that day, what we usually do, we invite the government entities to come and do medical assessments for parents who cannot afford, and they get overwhelmed. Because you see, we host about, the last time we hosted about 7,000 kids with disabilities in one space. And many of them come from vulnerable communities. And so you can imagine how long that queue was just for a day, and assessment takes quite a while. Like, you have to see 5 different people, then you get that medical report. In Kenya, you need that medical report so that you can be registered as a person with disability, so that you can get the benefits
That's
that
right.
comes with it. So
I
why?
would interrupt you with that question. Why? I think the question should, and it's not that it's a good word, but the question should be, why isn't there enough medical insurance paying for the assessment? It's not so much how expensive it is. It is, why is it not paying for the first assessments to be done? That should be the question, because we use instruments, we use testing, which have gone through extensive research. Let's be honest. Before a testing comes out, it's gone through a lot of investment, it's gone through a lot of research, it's gone through a lot of knowledge so that it is standardized and all that. And these are paying instruments. And I completely understand why, because before they are standardized, it's a lot of investment, right? And the question then is, why is it that every child, in terms of equity, and that's what we should advocate for, the first assessment must be subsidized. The first assessment, and this should be across. And this is why I was making the differentiation between non-physical disability and physical disability, because if you go to physical disability as a clinic and you have vision, you will probably be supported, but not what we're talking about. So this is where part of our advocacy should be, that the right for the first assessment of neurodivergent has to be heavily subsidized.
Yeah, you're very right. And I think that challenge is to all of us here. We need to advocate for that. We are the voice of what's going on out here. And let's use our voices, let's use our networks, our connections, just to figure out how we can make this faster policy. Secondly, let it be implemented, it has the usual structure. But thank you so much for your presentation. Very enlightening, very, very passionate. I love that you have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maria.
Yes, my pleasure.
Let's cut up and let's move on to the next session. We'll have a short break, a little bit of entertainment that will run for about 6 to 7 minutes from tunes, for guys to take a toilet break, coffee break, and then we come back later and listen to the next set of panelists who I'm excited to hear what.